Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Survivor to Thriver, episode 55. So we're in the mid-50s, so it's really easy for me to find cool number things right now. Willie McGinnis, one of my favorite linebackers, but again, I dove into the numerology world, and the number 55 is actually about forward thinking, about perceived understanding of the future, which I think is a great thing for us all to think about. We've talked a lot about how thinking about the future can sometimes give us anxiety, but what I've been trying to do lately is find things that I'm looking forward to. And those of you that are listening to this now, it's the throes of spring, which is when my RSDD, my reverse seasonal depression disorder, shows up because I hate summer. And so it's been really warm here lately. It's been a little like preview of that. So I've had to look forward to the future and maybe even a little too far ahead because I know winter will come again, is what I've been reminding myself of. So with that, I will introduce my ever hopeful, because believe it or not, you are the more optimistic of the two of us, ever hopeful co-host, Eric DeRosa from The Cynic.
Happy days, Mark. It's good to see you. I don't know how to really follow that. It's March. We're about to get dumped with snow.
That's what I'm saying. Winter's coming back.
So I'm very hopeful.
Now, later too.
I'm very excited. There's some amazing people in town over the next 6 weeks. The skiing will be really good. Amy, as you know and I know, is turning 50. My Amy is turning 50 in 3 weeks. So my in-laws will be out here. And it'll be the first time they've been here since January of 2020. So their first, let's call it post-COVID visit. So we're really excited for that. And there'll be some fun festivities, which you'll be participating in. You just don't know it yet. But yes, it's hard to believe ski season, the end of ski season is right around the corner, and I'll soon be using my legs to pedal a bike and climb and continue to build what one of my clients actually said to me today. She's like, you do realize that you and Mark are creating this really cool brand. And it dawned on me, like, we started with a podcast and now From Survivor is actually becoming a brand that people are talking about. So it's unbelievably humbling to me. But really excited nonetheless. How's everything else going with you besides the future onset of RSDD?
Things are great. I think it's similar to what I said last week. Crazy busy to the point where it feels a little hamster wheel-ish, but I know in 5 or 6 weeks, some of it will come to a grinding halt and I'll have a little bit more time for myself and reflection. So I'm looking forward to that as well, even though it means not as much snow. But no, things are really good. And I'm excited to meet and speak with our guest today. And just kind of a renewed thought and enthusiasm lately. I've been skiing with clients who actually are both in recovery. And so we've been chatting a lot about mental health, and it's something that they're very much in the forefront with, both from an organizational standpoint with the businesses they run and other things. And it's one of those things that runs in ebbs and flows, right? It's like things turn into a bit of a grind sometimes. I don't mean that in a negative way, but you're just, kind of pushing through and getting things done. And then you have those moments of like, oh, this is why we do this. And yes. I've definitely had a couple of those this week.
Excellent. Well, right before I introduce the guest, first of all, I have to, I'm going to credit Amy on air because it was her posting of our guest's article a couple of months ago. It was probably right at the start of ski season. And that article is still our most viewed post on Facebook. And the most comments. And so when I read it and read the article, when you just happen to read something and say, I really have to speak live to this person and I really want to meet this person. And, people's paths cross, as we know, nothing is a coincidence. And so when I reached out to her and we were emailing back and forth and she said she'd be on the show, I was like, I'm kind of fanboying a little bit, I guess. But with that, our guest today.
Wait, if you're gonna fanboy, does that mean I could just leave? Like, you guys got this? Or
No, because because you seem to be very insightful today. So I need you to be around for this conversation. So our guest today is Ganel-Lyn Condie. Ganel-Lyn is a popular motivational speaker who is known for inspiring others with her unique honesty, authenticity, and spirit. She is dedicated to her family, faith, and inspiring others. Ganel-Lyn loves teaching others with speaking and writing. She has experienced healing from a major chronic illness and is the mother to 2 miracle children. After the heartbreaking suicide of her 40-year-old sister, Meg, Ganel-Lyn is constantly working towards prevention. She lives with an open heart and feels passionate about sharing principles that will empower others to live life with more joy. She is a regular television/radio guest and hosts the popular shows Real Talk CFM and The Middle. Ganel-Lyn's talks and books have now encouraged thousands of people all over the world. She loves growing older with her cute husband, Rob, and aims to keep learning and loving. With that, let's welcome in Ganel-Lyn. We're so excited to have you on our show today.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. And I love when people read my bio because I know what it says, but when it gets to the end and it says, I love growing older with my cute husband, Rob, like it makes me smile. And so either I'm waiting to be interviewed or I'm about to go to the mic to speak. And it makes me laugh a little bit. And I think that's a good sign after 30 years of marriage, right?
It's a wonderful sign, but I have to ask you something. As a fellow dude, do you have permission to refer to him as cute?
He loves it. He loves it that he's 53 and he doesn't believe me that he's getting cuter as the years go on. But I don't know what it is about guys, but you guys get to get gray hair. It can fall out. You can get wrinkles. And everyone in society is like, oh, look at how dashing and handsome they are. If women start losing our hair, going gray and getting wrinkled, nobody says, gosh, you're aging so nicely. So I don't know what that's about, but yeah, I think he's cuter after 30 years than even before. So,
well, I mean, I'm growing my hair out because I can.
I love it.
So, but the gray is only here.
Yeah, he tried.
For those of you listening and not watching, I'm just showing you my gray ass chin. But I love to hear you say that because Eric and I have shared very, very often about how huge our wives are in our journey and how important they've been. And Eric is about to celebrate 25 years, right?
25 years, married in April. We've been together 30 years this just past January.
Yep.
Wow.
And Amy and I are about to have our 20th wedding anniversary in June. Yes, we were children when we got married. Okay, guys? Everybody out there listening, watching? Children. We're not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's worked out for us.
You were the exact same age I was.
Exactly. But I do think, and it's something that's been borne out often in a lot of polls and mental health things is that, especially happily married, but they say even married in general, people tend to live longer and healthier lives. And I think it speaks so much to something Eric and I push on all the time, which is community, right? And community can be tight and large. And, hearing about the unfortunate suicide of your sister, Meg, at the age of 40, that's shattering, and that ripped a piece of your own community away. And I'm just wondering, at the onset of starting on your journey, were you trying to recreate that community, or what was it that made you say, I have to speak out, I have to find a way to help more people to understand that there's a better way to be?
That's a really great question, because at the time of this conversation we're having today, we're a few days shy of the 8th anniversary of her death. And my brother found her on my mom's birthday, which is kind of horrific. She had, it was obvious she had died previous to that day, but that is the day that's on the headstone in the cemetery. And Meg was very beloved within a church community and a family community and a friend community. And I think, to answer your question, I feel like she's always my co-host or my traveling companion. Like, I'm saying the things that she isn't here to say anymore. And she has, in effect, saved thousands of people just by the fact that her story is shared so often in platforms like this and the Today Show article in books I've written and other events. And I would just say I've created a community has been created in her memory, because as we are getting ready to push record, my phone's blowing up with DMs on social media and Instagram from moms and individuals that are struggling with mental health, that have kids that are suicidal. And I get thousands of those messages every week. And that's because of Meg, you know? So in some way, I'll be her voice and I'll share her story. She left a void in her community and in our family. And I like to tell people that suicide for me is about one decision someone makes, not every decision they make, but it changes their other choices. And so especially when I'm in the high school speaking, I try to tell teenagers their frontal cortex isn't fully developed. And so statistically speaking, they're making a decision about suicide within 15 minutes of having the thought. And when I talk about Meg, suicide was one of the decisions she made, but she was amazing at dance parties and road trips, and loved to play basketball, and loved me. And so there's so much about Meg that we're not better without her. And so for your viewers, I would say the same thing, that like my life, as much as in the wake of her death, books and speaking and media has been created in her honor, my life's not better. Like I would trade all of this Today Show article trending in the top 3 for my sister to come back. But what I think people know of me, if they follow me on social or they've heard me present anywhere, is that I'll have the conversation. And both of you are kindred spirits because you're willing to have the conversation too. And I've come to know that this is a conversation that needs to happen every day. This isn't like a special month out of the year that's mental health month or a special day. It's for me every single day. Like every day I wake up is mental health awareness day for me because of Meg.
Well, because every day you wake up without her.
Yeah. And every day I have to address my own mental health. I mean, I talk about this pretty publicly and I've written about it as well. I grew up in a family where Meg wasn't the only one that struggled with mental health. I still have family members alive and struggling and have been in big danger zones in the last 8 years since Meg died. So this isn't a one and done conversation. So I really applaud both you and Eric for having this conversation on this platform, because I believe it takes just one conversation to help one person to think differently to save a life. And even I'm going to be really transparent. You, Mark, were saying that like you're sad at the thought of winter going away, and I have to intentionally add light. I live in Utah, so my winters are similar. I have to be very intentional about my mental health during the winter months and not having sunshine. And so I think one of the things that's important is that March to May is the peak season for suicide. And I think a lot of people think it's the holidays, and it's just statistically not true. So the timing of this conversation for me on a personal level is important, but also just for your audience. We think sometimes when the sun comes back and the flowers are blooming, that everyone's good. And in many ways, a lot of people are not like Mark, and they've held on through the winter, and they get really triggered by the change of the seasons in the spring. And it's a crazy wackadoodle time for mental health.
And I've not always been that way. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I love how you put that about having that conversation every day, because when Mark and I first started the podcast, it was all about shattering the stigma and having these conversations, and we want them to be kitchen table conversations. We want them to be, if it's New York, a subway conversation, wherever people happen to be. And one of the things that immediately resonated with me was when you were saying, I wish for a world in which we talk about mental health as commonly and normally as we talk about sports, food, and TV shows.
Right.
And that's that message is exactly the message that we're trying to get across with our audience.
Well, I mean, I think especially I applauded both you and Mark at the onset of this, that it's two men that I'm having this conversation with, because every time I'm in a situation to message around mental health, I call out the men in the room. You're the number one demographic that is dying by suicide. And I think that shocks a lot of people because they assume it's our teens and our LGBT community or our veterans, but it's actually not. It's middle-aged men that are dying by suicide at the highest rate. It's not that suicide isn't also the number one cause of death for teens. It's just that we need to have a conversation where men are part of this conversation. And we are having a very human experience, all of us. And so for me, mental health isn't just about, am I suicidal? You know, sometimes when we have these conversations and we talk about, like my sister Meg, we can see the extremes of where it goes. But there's not a person on the planet, and I've met thousands, probably millions at this point personally, that I've had conversations with, that either love someone that struggles with mental health or they struggle themselves. So that's everyone on the planet. So I get really frustrated when we make it only about a special month out of the year or a certain demographic, because there's not a demographic that mental health shouldn't be relevant. I just don't understand where we think we can identify the danger group or the group that's most vulnerable. Aren't we clear that after the last 2 years, from the pandemic to the economy to politics to, at the time of this taping, a war playing out in the Ukraine, that all of us are like one headline away from a nervous breakdown? Like, all of us are depleted and vulnerable in so many ways. And so just like our physical health, I just feel like, for me, one of the first things I am aware of when I wake up in the morning is, where am I at mentally? Like, where am I at today? And I ask myself that multiple times during the day, because even though I have a ton of tools and I've had this conversation and I have education, I have a minor in psychology, I have a teaching degree. There's days, you guys, my tools don't work. Like, I'm digging through the toolbox because all the stuff that used to work or has helped on certain days, it's not working anymore, you know? So I love that we get to we've got to keep throwing darts at the dartboard, because there's some days the darts aren't sticking, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'm definitely willing to have the conversation.
Well, I have one very uninformed opinion to share and then a question to ask.
Okay.
And the uninformed opinion is, the reason why Eric and I, as two dudes having this conversation, I think are special, is we are essentially kind of the last male generation that was taught that we weren't supposed to have these problems, that we were tougher than this, that we could suck it up and figure this out. And it was all in our heads, and there was no reason to cry. And, you know, for lack of a better term, just get the fuck over it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been guilty of that all throughout my life at different times. And at other times, I have gotten to the point where I couldn't solve it myself and had to seek help. So that's my really uninformed opinion. We like to point out that neither Eric or I are mental health professionals. We're just your basic variety dudes who've had mental health issues who are willing to talk about them.
Yeah.
But that leads me to my question, which is, we talk about all these different vulnerabilities and all the different things that people have, no matter sex, gender, sexual orientation, age, and the conversation is beginning to change. I hope. That's what I see. But how do we accelerate it? You know, you've had this conversation with so many different people. You've shared very publicly this awful tragedy that hit your family of Meg's suicide. How do we allow, right? The thing that I always bring up is if I break my ankle, I have no problem telling people about the surgery, showing them my x-rays. Man, PT's a bitch. You know, we'll have those conversations. But to sit there and say, you know, I had a 2.5-hour conversation with my therapist last night and realized that some of these things based all the way back in my childhood, and it's not any fault, but I'm not really sure how to sort it out. Even saying that out loud to you right now, even though I've actually said those things to Eric at my kitchen table, is way more uncomfortable than talking about my ankle. Why?
I love your vulnerability and honesty on that, because I'm going to be clear with you that I do think in some ways we are changing the conversation. It is changing, but we still have a long way to go. And to give context, the day we put Meg's headstone was the day we found Robin Williams. And I think I write about this in the Today Show article. Forgive me, I have so much content out there. I'm like, did I say that there? Or did I?
No, you absolutely did.
And I remember for a moment feeling like, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone, or if Robin's family is listening, I felt like collectively the world joined our family in some grieving, because suicide grief is a unique grief. As I look back 8 years ago from about that milestone, I do think we're having some different conversations, podcasts like this and other notable figures in sports and in Hollywood are talking about it. But since Robin Williams' death, we've lost Kate Spade, we've lost countless people that it's almost like each time it happens, I'm thinking, I don't know how to scream any louder. So I feel really humble and grateful that you invited me on, because I'm sharing it everywhere I can share it. And I'm not claiming that I have any magic answer, but I think what you just said, Mark, is why are we still framing getting support at some level as a weakness and not as a strength? I like to think of therapy as education. Let's be clear. Nobody is like, okay, so I'm going to be getting another PhD, and everyone at the kitchen table or the party or wherever you're at the workplace gets embarrassed for that person. No one's like, oh my gosh, you're getting another degree. That's so embarrassing how educated you are, right? No one does that.
No, I just asked them why they're still spending that much money.
Okay, so maybe there's a little judgment from Mark, because
no, always judgment from Mark. That's I'm the asshole in the corner always, and I'm okay with that.
No, so I give that analogy because for me, therapy and that conversation, Mark, you had with your therapist is education for your brain and your heart and your relationships. And I just feel like there's none of us that are born to people that know how to do it, and they're raising kids that then don't know how to do it. And then we grow up and we keep not knowing how to do it. And so at a certain point, what I hope we are normalizing is that I really feel like I'm trying to be part of the solution, and I need support. I just had therapy today, and I had an awareness with the person I was talking to that I've, in all the work and all the therapy and all the processing that I've done, I said, wait a minute. I never have had that awareness. I just had that awareness. Well, if I'm not willing to put me on the schedule, I'm just as much a part of the problem then. And so I can do all the activation, all the advocating, all the creation of content on social media, all the interviews I want, but ultimately I couldn't save Meg, and it wasn't my job. My job is to take care of my mental health, and then watch it extend when I sit at my kitchen table and I say to my friends and family, how was therapy for you today? Because it rocked for me. Like, I had a total light bulb moment. Like, if you follow me on social, I will regularly post, therapy was amazing today. And I think people sometimes are still surprised, and I'm thinking, I don't just talk about this stuff, like I'm living it. I am very clear that I am a work in progress. I think when your leg analogy or your knee, did you say ankle, foot, or knee?
I don't know why. And it's funny.
He always uses ankle, yeah.
I always use his ankle. Okay. Your ankle.
Maybe because it's such a complex joint. Maybe that's why I use it.
Yeah. But think about it, Mark, like you would go fix it. Hopefully, if it breaks and you cast it and maybe you have to have surgery, it's done. It's kind of there's an end point. I think we as humans don't like the idea that mental health is never done. It's not, there's not an end point. We're always going to be working on it. Always, just like putting gas in the car. You don't say, well, got the oil change, got the car filled up with gas, we're done and good. No.
Never. And actually, Ganel-Lyn, as somebody who's had a shitload of injuries through my life, physically and mentally, the thing is, once you get to our age, those old injuries aren't just fixed. Like, you still have to maintain them. I'm sure Eric has some lingering thing from him running cross country when he was 15 that he never thought was going to bother him again. And then the other day he woke up and was like, oh, damn it. Right?
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, I feel like every year now it kind of gets a little exponential. Every morning I wake up, my lower back, and Mark, some of the people that we ski with, right? We're pounding and pounding and pounding. But while I'm on the couch in the morning trying to stretch out my back, at the same time, I've got either my mindfulness or my music going and I'm meditating. And so I think that's kind of the difference, right? Is I'm taking care of the physical ailments that I have related to the sport that we do, but I'm also paying attention and working on the other muscle in my body that needs attention on a daily basis. And it is, I was on my recent trip to Maui, I was lying on the beach and I was just kind of looking out, and I know we had this conversation about Hawaii before we started, and from where I am, you can see Lanai like right across
Right there.
and I just remember lying there and watching the waves, the sets come in and the sets come in and the sets come in. And I think I told you this, Mark, when we were down there, in many ways, I see the mental health conversation in a similar light, right? The waves are slowly starting to crest the shore, but there's a tsunami out there. And when that tsunami finally hits, it's going to be like, the cancer conversation that was always hushed under the table. It was like the HIV conversation, right? And then finally Magic had his press conference and maybe I get the date wrong, but I think it was 1991.
91.
And then that became, a household topic of conversation. There was, the stigma was kind of like lifted a little bit. And I feel like we're not quite there yet with the mental health conversation, but the tipping point is out to sea, and it's making its way in, and sooner or later it's going to crash to shore. And this will be a household conversation. It's my hope. And your why Ganel-Lyn is very much like mine. Like I want to see, I believe in a world where people can speak openly and honestly about their mental health without fear of judgment.
And let me say this, I don't think anyone wants to spend any more minutes talking about the pandemic, but if anything, it shines a light on where we thought maybe we were doing good and where we were vulnerable. And I think all of us, after 2 years of a pandemic, are vulnerable on a mental health level for some reason or another, whether it's isolation because of where you've lived and how it's looked for you financially, or it's literally just like the fact of the matter is there's a toll that is taken when there's something global like we've all gone through. The good part of the pandemic, I will say, in a mental health standpoint, is that telemed is now even more widespread. So for years, because I've been in this space for a good 8 years full time, the first few years of this work that I was doing very intentionally, I would often field questions about accessibility for therapists, especially if, a guy doesn't want to leave work and a mom is trying to find a babysitter or whatever. The pandemic has brought practitioners into our rooms, into our phones, into our cars. I know a lot of individuals that now leave on their lunch break, go sit in their car and have a therapy session with their therapist that happens to live 3 states over. And so in some ways, as bad and as hard as the pandemic is, I do know how to use DoorDash now. I do know how to order, my groceries and go pick it up. And I can now tell people okay, you don't have a therapist that lives in your county? Well, then find a therapist in Kentucky, because it doesn't really matter where you live now. And if it doesn't fit, one of the things I like to say is I hit some resistance from what Mark and you have both shared. You're willing to have the conversation and you're willing to kind of be a poster child and say, I believe in therapy. I believe in talking about mental health. So there's the first layer that we just need to normalize the conversation around mental health, and we need to make it celebrated that we're talking about it. The next layer is, what does therapy look like? Well, that's a very broad term. And so when people come to me and say, there's these groups of people that we're just trying to bring to the conversation, and podcasts like this help do that. There's this other group over here, and my phone is blowing up right now with individuals that have been at it for a while and they're tired because their loved ones or themselves have been in and out of therapy, and they have a fatigue level of it's never getting better. And those groups of people stop me often and say, or message me and say, I tried therapy, it didn't work. Now, those are the individuals that would be more close to where Meg was. Meg had a lifetime of struggle and a lot of resources, and we had gotten her help. And she, you know, the short answer of why did she die was she got tired. She got tired. So for your listeners, if you're in that group, so, you know, like if your listeners are yelling at us right now and saying like, okay, fine, I'm totally fine with mental health. I talk about therapy all the time. It's not working. I want to talk to that group, because that group tends to be the group that's like, I tried it, it's not worked. I would say to you, therapy is a broad term, and there are some new modalities out there that are really effective, for example, with trauma. And trauma is effective with treatment with EMDR. I just had a conversation with 2 doctors yesterday that are doing ketamine treatments for brain rewiring. That's super effective with addiction, anxiety, OCD behaviors. So that is hopeful for me. When you ask the question, is it changing? What also is changing is that there's a bigger term of therapy. So if traditional talk therapy has not been your jam and it's not helped you, and you're thinking, I'm so tired because I can't do another 5 minutes, let alone 5 years like this, just like a bad haircut, which would not be Mark because he's trying to grow out his hair right now. But if you have
My mother is still pissed about it. Just to be clear.
Hey, listen, my kid lives in Hawaii, and his hair is to his shoulders, and he has naturally curly hair, and I love his long hair. So I'm a fan of the long hair. But I would say if you have had a bad haircut and you don't just generally, unless you're growing your hair out like Mark, you don't stop getting your hair done. And so if therapy hasn't worked, then keep looking for tools to add to your toolbox, because therapy has also expanded in the last 5 years in ways that I am hopeful about.
That's great. And just for our listeners and watchers, I just want to unpack a couple things. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is often used for trauma processing of PTSD. And you mentioned ketamine therapy. We've actually talked a lot, not just about ketamine therapy, but a lot of alternative, you know, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to use the blanket statement of drugs, but chemicals, you know, there's people doing microdosing of psilocybin, heavy dose of psilocybin. We've actually had multiple guests on who've tried different other mind-altering treatments to huge success. And we are about as inclusive as it comes on this, because our whole jam about this is kind of the same as finding a life partner or a sex partner. It might take you a little while, but it's worth sorting that out. You know, you know, the therapy sense of understanding, you know, I've had a lot of, and I'm a nerd, so it appeals to me. I've had a huge amount of success in cognitive behavioral therapy, but CBT does not work for everyone. It takes a painful amount of self-awareness. It takes a painful amount of processing out loud with your partners and people you're close to in your life. A lot of really bizarre, uncomfortable conversations, sometimes even with yourself. And you know, I think about it, and it's so hard, right? You know, one of the questions you always think about, and I'm sure you've rehashed this in your mind way too many times, and what you said was beautiful. It wasn't your job to save Meg's life, right? You couldn't. But, you know, looking back on it, it's like she had all of these, you know, like you said, she had resources, she tried different things, but it is impossible to not look back and be like, well, you know, at 18, what could have been different, or 25 or 30 or 35. But what I would say to the people out there, that audience you were just speaking to, is please listen to Ganel-Lyn and try something else. Just keep going. Like it sounds really cheesy, and I don't really know how else to say it better or more eloquently than that. But like, you know, no one wants to see you give up. Listen to Ganel-Lyn talk about how much she misses Meg. And there are people, so many people out there who will miss you if you're gone. So please, like, just keep going however you can. And, you know, we're all out there. We're going to share Ganel-Lyn stuff later. Like, reach out to us. We have resources. We can put you in connect with people. It breaks my heart. And I'm so glad you're doing this work. And, you know, similar to Steve Phillip, a guest we had on earlier who lost his son to suicide, it is a huge testament and an honor to them. But yeah, we'd rather have them here, wouldn't we?
Yeah, and I love what you said there. I give also I like to use metaphors and analogies because I think it helps take complex issues and simplify in a way that's memorable and you can grab it in those moments of stress. And so I have some things that I've repeated a lot in public forums, and one of them is stay in your body. And the reason I say that is because sometimes it's that choice for 5 more minutes, 5 hours more of staying in your body. The other analogy I like to give is if your refrigerator broke and you pulled out the toolbox and you went to pull out the first tool. Now, listen, I am not a handy person. So, I mean, I'm using this analogy very loosely.
I'm useless in the handyman realm. So
yeah, don't ask me what.
I can help you guys if we get
okay, thanks, Mark. But like if you pull out a flathead screwdriver, I think that's an accurate term, and it doesn't fit, you go back to the toolbox, you dig through, you pull out something else to try it again. You don't just say, I guess I'm never opening the fridge again. There's milk in there and you've got to have your midnight bowl of cereal. And so you've got to be able to get into it. And so for those that are listening that are like, I've tried every tool. Mark, you referenced.
Have you?
Exactly. I mean, the truth is you haven't, because even in the last few years, there's moments where grief will swell in my soul because I know if Meg was still here, I have so many more resources to suggest or try. I also know that as my mother has processed her grief and deals with her own mental health issues that are very chronic and very severe my whole life. Not a lot of people know that story as much out of some respect for her privacy. That I know my mom had a place in her heart where a few months before Meg died, she knew that as a mother, she had given 100% to giving resources to Meg. And I think we would have probably been in great danger of losing her if my mom hadn't come to that place. So I'm grateful that my mom kind of came to an awareness of like this, I mean, no pun intended, Meg wasn't in her right mind. The idea that suicide is one decision someone makes and they make it because it's about pain control. And so there are so many more resources that are coming out and being developed and being discussed and being shared on podcasts and being posted about that Meg hadn't tried. And so I will just say the other thing that's really important to me is we have to keep talking about it, because the people listening to this podcast are usually like alone in a dark place in the middle of the night. I mean, that's where that crazy thinking, it feels so real to you to say, I've let everyone down. I'm tired of going to therapy. I've tried all the things. It's not working. I am not it's not to anyone's benefit that I'm even still here. That's the lie that Meg believed and many people believe.
And it's so important that you've brought up this larger topic, and I've been very open in the last 3 months about my most recent journey. We'll call it the yellow brick road, as you like to call it, Ganel-Lyn. But the yellow brick road is nonlinear, as we know, and you meet many characters along the way. And this last time, Amy was very instrumental. Mark was very instrumental in, realizing, okay, we've tried this and we've tried that. Okay, so now maybe there are some other things out there. And so it became a combination of talk therapy. It became a combination of medication with my psychiatrist. Then this time we layered in Eastern medicine, right? So it was mindfulness and meditation and Reiki. And Dana Neural, I talk about her all the time on this show, and I can't give her enough credit and thanks, but Reiki completely opened up a whole new pathway for me and being able to understand the whole mind-body connection. Mm-hmm. And early on in that process, I, through the podcast and being very open, I made sure that Kathleen, our therapist, and Dana, my holistic person, were in contact so that the two of them would be on the phone speaking about what the other was doing, so that they were in lockstep, right, with my treatment. And so just when I thought, oh, I'm going to go through the same thing again, I found a new pathway, and I'm sitting here now, and people have been asking me, how are you doing? And my response is, I am currently a much better version of my former self.
Eric, what you said is so beautiful, because I would say to those that are listening that are tired and they're not sure they have the courage, the strength, the wisdom, the insight, the whatever, to take the next 2,000 steps, because in their mind it feels like 2,000 steps. I love that you're sharing, like, you came to that crossroads and you took one more step, right?
Yep.
I'm going to say to you, I have so many divergent tools in my toolbox. Like, they're from every source, from faith to holistic to, I get regular massages because grief settles in your bones. And so after Meg died with my chronic illness and her death, I have to have that. Even during the pandemic, when things were shut down, I was so grateful that I had practitioners that would still meet with me. But I guess the overwhelming thing I want to reflect back to you, Eric, and to Mark, is that anyone out there struggling, whether you're like, no matter where you're at in the journey and you're thinking, I don't have the new tools, or I don't know if I even want to start therapy, what you're learning in this process will be a gift if you choose to give to someone else. And Eric and Mark are doing that. I'm trying to do that. And so one of the things I say to those struggling, especially with those that struggle chronically for long periods of time, not only will we not be better without you, you're learning things that you can't take that knowledge with you. Like, we need it. Like, your fellow brothers and sisters on the planet need to know what you've learned. And if you're gone, who's going to turn around and say, you know what, when I hit that wall, this is how I got back up. And one of my favorite shows that I've binge watched way too many times, other than Gilmore Girls, is West Wing. And I'm not embarrassed to admit it, but I probably have West Wing memorized. There's a really great episode where, and it makes me cry when I talk about it, and I know it's just a stinking TV show, but there's a situation where one character, if your listeners are familiar with Josh, and he's got PTSD because he was involved in the shooting of the president. And then he's got a mentor who's a recovering addict. And he tells him this great story of, there was a guy walking around one day and he fell in a pit. And all of a sudden, the priest walked by and threw a scripture down, and the doctor walked by and threw a prescription down. And all of a sudden his friend walked by and jumped in the pit with him. And the guy said, man, now you're stuck down here with me. And his friend said, yeah, but buddy, you don't know, like, I've been here before and I know how to get out. And I would just say these kind of conversations we're having is because we all three have been there, and by the grace of God, for me, faith is a really important part of my story. I could be there again tomorrow. And so I'm trusting that friends of mine will walk by and jump in the pit too. And they'll say, I know how to get out of this pit. So for those of you that are like, you're no use to the world and you have nothing good to give and you've burned every bridge because of your addiction or whatever that is, like, we need you to journal and stick around and keep trying, because you have no idea who you are going to walk by one day and see in the pit. And you're going to know exactly how they feel. You're going to know how to join them in empathy, not sympathy. And you'll be able to talk them in a place. Now, I say that with a big asterisk warning. In my faith, I'm Christian. I only believe there's one Savior, and it's Jesus Christ, and I'm not the Savior. Because a lot of your audience, like my family, has lost someone. There's a grief with suicide that's crazy and can wake you up with nightmares for the rest of your life, that you weren't there that day to jump in the pit with your loved one and they are already gone. I'm going to say to you, your mental health is just as important as your loved one. So you can love, you can invite, and you can influence, but you can't save. You can't save. So stay in your body, journal about what you're learning. And if you feel like you're drowning, you're learning to swim in a way that you're going to teach a swimming lesson. I promise you that. I promise you, we need to know what you figured out, Eric. We need to know what Mark's figured out. We need to know what I've figured out. And I'll share what Meg knew and isn't here to say, you know, because she's not here to say it, I'll say it.
Well, it reminds me so much, Eric. I think it was episode 30 with Erin Murphy, and listening to you say, Ganel-Lyn, to stay in your body. One of the overarching themes of Erin's talk about suicidal ideation and not completing the act is simple words. Thank you for staying. And I'm choking up a little bit as I think about it, because as someone who has struggled with those thoughts and with the understanding, and I think the hardest thing is not just the people with those thoughts, it's the people that love them that don't understand it, who can't rectify and make sense of the fact that this person doesn't think that they're needed in the world and that they're not cared for, they're not loved, that there won't be a giant hole left by them ripping themselves out. And I would love to hear what you would say to those people, not just the people who are having these thoughts, but, you know, you talked about how you can invite and love and try to inspire them. But what are some things that you've had to find, even perhaps before Meg's death, dealing with other family members who struggle with mental health and Meg, in order to sort of put that, because it's so hard, right? We want to be caregivers. We want to save the people we love. But, you know, it is the classic, you know, airplane metaphor where you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, or you won't be able to help anyone. How's that oxygen mask showed up for you?
It's a really important question. And I'm so grateful you asked it, because I am a recovering perfectionist addict and the oldest child of a mother that is very generous in spirit, but struggles and has struggled her whole life with mental health issues. The oldest sister with Meg there that I knew was struggling. And so now, as a mother of two that are both now adults, some of my really vulnerable trauma is in wanting to save people. You know, I mean, I really want to control vulnerability like most humans. And the thought of losing people I love in reality is my reality. Like, my worst nightmare has actually happened. So when Meg was found by my brother, I had lost a sister when I was 10. So my sisters are buried by each other. She was 2. I had lost grandparents. I had lost my father-in-law. I had grieved before. But suicide grief brings up this what if game in your head. And so one of the things I like to consider is boundaries are loving. And the most loving thing we can do is be clear on our boundaries. And I really do love traditional talk therapy as well, Mark, because I'm a processor. And so it's helpful for me, but I've also used in the last few months some hypnotherapy, because I've used EMDR, because there's still a little tape in my head that if I'm not perfect, I'm going to lose someone that I love. And it's really hard to tell your brain that's not true when it's true and it's happened. So one of the things I like to remind myself is that the people I love deserve my boundaries. And they need to see that I have boundaries in my life, because that is loving. Sometimes we think when we say no, that we're not being loving people. But in faith perspective, and regardless of your faith, if you believe in a higher power, your higher power says no all the time. And most of us would categorize our higher power as loving, but God says no to us all the time. So every time we want to say yes, like knee-jerk reaction, realize you're automatically saying no to something else. And when you say no, you're saying yes to something else. So to answer your question, I try to be really clear on what my yeses and my nos are, because ultimately I can't do anything for the people I love if I am not responsible first and foremost with my own health and well-being. Now, when I say that, I have to ask for help, but that's on me. I mean, I'm grateful I have good friends and a husband and kids that will call me on my stuff. You know, I'm grateful I have good friends that tell me the truth. But ultimately, all of us are responsible for our own yeses and nos. And if you're in a situation as a parent or a caregiver that feels like you're drowning in the mental health issues of your loved one, then I would say the best gift you could give your struggling loved one is to get some support for your mental health. So when parents message me, which they do, and your listeners are welcome to reach out to me. I'm on all the social media platforms, including LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel, and I read those messages and I'm intentional about it. I often turn it back to them and say, where are you getting mental health support? Because they're messaging me about their kid or their spouse or their sister. And I say, where are you? Because if you're long-term in this fight, you're depleted. And so you need to start with you. Then you will have, like you said, Mark, the oxygen to share. So on the days where it's scary and hard, I go and get more support, and I call my therapist and I go get my body work done, and I do the work that changes the energy inside of me. So I'm not running the trauma tape, because the trauma tape tells me, and I have evidence of it, I could lose people I love.
Yeah.
And then
I mean,
yeah.
You honestly, in some ways, have the worst case trauma tape.
Yeah.
Many of us do, because it's like, no, that is actually what happened.
Yeah.
And no, and it's one of those things too. And I was struck with, as you talked about it, this idea of, you know, it's the old adage: you open one door or close one door, and that just means the other one is shut or the new one is open. But I was thinking about it even in terms of people who are truly struggling, right? I think it's easiest probably to think of it in the addictive term. We talk a lot about enabling, or are you allowing that sort of behavior to continue? And I was thinking about how, in a way, if we're really worried about a loved one and we're not finding ways to take care of ourselves, or even look at, we could have shared trauma, right? Like if you think about a parent and a child, or a husband and wife, if one is going through that tough of a time, there's probably some shared trauma involved. And then the partner going through that increases that, right? So it changes things. And it made me think about how often we are complicit in that, where, and I don't mean this to point fingers, and you didn't either. And I'm just saying that because it started to think about it. But, you know, it's like one of those things. It's like, oh, I have this because this happened when I was a child. And it's so easy then to be like, oh, it was childhood trauma. That's my parents' fault, or that's that fault. And it's like, no, actually, it may not actually be anyone's fault, but the fact that it hasn't been processed, or you haven't looked at it or understood how it changed your behavior, or it changed how you felt about yourself, that's actually the issue. It's not just the thing, right? And now, full disclosure, I'm not saying there are trauma that is next level that doesn't involve like just processing it. I understand that, but I do find so often what you're saying is so true of if there is strife or there is mental struggle within any part of that family unit, there's probably a strong case that everyone could use someone to chat with and get a little stronger.
When you say that, I mean, there's too many statistics that show within a church community, a school community, and a family, when there's one suicide, it opens up the option door, you said doors, for those within that sphere of influence. And so when I'm in schools and in corporate, I love doing corporate training because I love meeting a sales team and they want me to come in and talk about whatever. And I'm like, the sales team's crying. And I love when we cry and we laugh and we have all the range of emotions, because we spend our lives doing jobs and going to school and doing these things. But the reality is everyone we're going to school with and going to the grocery store with and on the ski slopes with has a mental health need. I mean, the reality is that. And I don't hope I'm not bursting anyone's bubble. If they're listening to this podcast, they're probably already aware of that. But let's just normalize that. And then let's also say that everyone is doing the best they can. I mean, the generous assumption is that all of us are doing the best we can with the information we have at the time. And we're all playing tapes of trauma, and we're all on a journey of healing, hopefully.
Yeah. And it's such an important topic, because for those of us who have been through healing journeys, and there are multiple healing journeys, right? It's a long journey and it twists and it turns. And it's going to sound strange, but I think you'll know what I mean when I say this. It often, at some point, becomes easier for the person who's actually going through it, because I know what emotions I'm feeling. I'm having the discussions with my therapist. I'm going through the treatment. I know my good days and I know my not so good days. Often for the caregivers, they're the ones who are trying to really be strong for the person that they're supporting. And many times at the sacrifice of their own mental health, at the sacrifice of their own physical health. And at some point, if their self-care is not looked after and their mental health is not looked after, they have caregiver PTSD and trauma and things like that. It can spiral for them. And so it's very important. We've talked about this. I love how you put it. It's just as important for those who are caring for loved ones and friends and family members who are experiencing trauma or some type of, acute mental health crisis, to then also ensure that they're getting the support and the care that they need so that they can be even stronger to be able to be there for the other people.
So what you're talking about is the theme of the book I have coming out May 1st, which is Meg's birthday. And I don't want to open a whole new can of worms because I know we're coming close to the end of our time. But the word that I write this whole book about, and it's the label for what you just were describing, Eric, is stewardship. And I write about stewardships. So if you're the caregiver, your stewardship isn't ownership. If you're the one struggling with depression, anxiety, or addiction, that's your stewardship. It's not what you own. It's not your identity. And so, in Eastern philosophy, in Christianity, in Judaism, in whatever practice you have, when you stop going into ownership and you pull back and see, how am I going to be a steward over this? Both of you are great stewards over your gift of skiing, right? That's not one of my stewardships. I'm really good at vacuuming though. Like if anyone needs a vacuumer, I rock at vacuuming, right? Like,
do you put the design in? Do I get like,
yes.
like the V herringbone into the bed?
No, it's all straight. No V's. But
oh no, see, I like the V.
Okay. Sorry. So,
she's like, nope. Not your vacuumer.
It's not your vacuumer. But my point in that is when I'm in ownership, and I'd love to come back in a few months and talk about this in more detail, because it really is a mental health and leadership tool that for the last 10 years has changed my approach, but it's a principle. And I have to remind myself all the time, I don't own the decisions of my 24-year-old. I don't own the decisions of my spouse. I don't own my body. I'm a steward over it. And hopefully, Eric, what you just said, I know more today than I did last week. But the problem is from a mental health standpoint, sometimes we judge what we know in 2022. We judge the decisions we made in 2017 based on what we know in 2022. That's never gonna make sense, because hopefully by next Wednesday, I'm smarter than I was this Wednesday, right? And I maybe have more wisdom, or I have more understanding of, like you said, Eric, your good days, bad days, your triggers, you have language around some of your feelings, you've had experiences. And so a caregiver may not have the stewardship understanding of depression and anxiety. And that's really frustrating when you're looking at your loved one saying, why don't you just snap out of it? Or why don't you just go to therapy? Or why are you struggling today? I have an amazing husband who deals with an ADD stewardship. I don't deal with that, but he doesn't deal with anxiety the way I do. And so the first 20 years of our marriage, there were a lot of times in his goodness as a husband, it was like, well, why is that stressing you? You need to just not be stressed about that. And I'm screaming inside thinking, well, oh my gosh, I just had to not be stressed about it. That's what I was supposed to do this whole time, right? Like, the reality is his stewardships are different than my stewardships. And so when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about survivor's guilt, or we're talking about being a support to a loved one that's still struggling, I would just say to those struggling, the research shows that those that survive jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, 90% of them say the moment they jumped, they knew they made a mistake. And those that survived that, which is a very small percentage, so please don't jump off a bridge, but those that survived report a happiness they never thought was possible the moment before they jumped. Because in that moment, there was so much pain, and it was about pain control. And so hopefully something we've talked about today gives someone that choice to make instead of a jump. But the reality is, in that moment right before a jump, if you're the loved one looking at your loved one and you're saying, you don't have to do this, and it's not that bad, and right, understand that your stewardship may be different, and you can invite and love and influence, but you can't save. And so if you're like our family, where you're now living through the aftermath of someone that has taken their life, understand that now you have an experience that creates empathy. You know, sympathy is the worst. I hate it. It makes me feel icky. It's like someone sitting on the other side of the fence looking over at my life saying, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Empathy is what I feel from both of you guys. Like, you get it. Like, even if our experiences are different, you're sitting with me in empathy because you have a shared experience that you can pull from, you know? And so for those people that have lost someone that they love to suicide, or they're trying to love someone right now that's struggling with mental health, find a place of empathy. What's that thing in your life that you wish you could fix and you can't fix? And you've worked on it, and you've worked on it, and you've worked on it. Maybe it's not mental health, but maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's a learning disability. Maybe it's an eating disorder. Maybe it's a bad habit. Pull from that place and understand that all of us have that part of us that if we could just fix it, we believe we're going to rock our lives. But the reality is we're living a really human experience. So I would just say, let's pull up some more empathy. That's what I try to do in the work I do. And the reality is I have a lot of empathy for you. I don't always have it for myself. And so I'm kind of always working on my own self-compassion. And I'd love to come back and talk about stewardships more, because it really has opened my heart and mind to not go into the ownership. And when I go into ownership, I'm back in the trauma of everything. And my sweet parents did the best they could with their stewardships. And I'm doing the best I can as a parent, and I'm messing it up. And that's all we can ask of each other, is that we're a work in progress learning.
Well, first of all, you are absolutely welcome and invited.
Starting to throw myself an invitation to come back.
No,
you're
come
allowed
back.
to invite yourself.
Yes, you're allowed to invite yourself. And both of us, we were, as you were speaking, we're Mark and I are looking at each other, and we'd be thrilled to have you back on anytime you want to come back on. And I'm just going to speak on behalf of Mark, and I think I'm accurate in saying this. The three of us are very similar in that way, where the three of us have endless empathy for others, and will put ourselves second so that we can help those other people. And I know
it's one of my biggest problems.
I know Mark and and it's something I'm trying to do a lot of work in myself right now, is trying to create boundaries of yes and no. I had this conversation at lunch today with the people I was skiing with, and we were talking about this whole idea of boundaries. And I said, unfortunately, too often people look at boundaries and they look at them and just think they're a wall. And in reality, boundaries are porous. What it just means is I'm going to allow some things in, but not all things in. And so it's timely that we're having this conversation right now about boundaries. But I think for all three of us, we all recognize we can't help others unless we help ourselves first.
And you know what? I don't ask help from people that don't practice their own boundaries. So the most loving people in my life are the people that are practicing boundaries, because I don't trust. It's not that there are a lot of people that I know mean well, but if they're not practicing their own boundaries, I'm afraid that if I ask for anything, it's going to be too much or push them over. And so I would really say that to parents and spouses, especially right now, that are feeling like they're drowning in someone else's mental health stuff, that your own boundaries are the most loving thing you can do right now to help your loved one. And for those of you that are listening that are drowning in your own personal stuff, I would just say the more self-care and boundary you live, the more capacity you have to show up for other people. But the signal we get sometimes as a society is just open the doors. And, I would just say, I don't want to drive on the freeway without some lines to show what lane I'm supposed to be in. That doesn't mean I can't pass into the next lane. It just means those boundaries create some safety for us.
Mm-hmm.
So
I just think of the old ranchers analogy that, good fences make great neighbors.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, Eric, about the idea of the boundary being porous, right? Like a good ranch fence is not a wall.
Yeah.
People and things can pass through it, and it can be adjusted.
Adjustable. Yeah, jinx. Yeah, exactly.
We just both said adjustable.
Yeah.
And I think, and I love so much about what you both said, but I want to tease out one more thing, Ganel-Lyn, that you said so beautifully, is this idea of trust of someone with boundaries. And it's interesting because, you would think, you hear this, people who are like hugely generous with their spirit, and you would reference Robin Williams earlier, and he spent his entire life, and he was very open about this, just trying to hurt, trying to cover up the hurts for everyone, not just himself, and he knew that laughter and pointing a finger at sort of the fallacy of humanity was the answer for that, but he was never able to heal the hurt inside of him.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear a lot of people speak about him, and part of it was it was always about others. He there's this wonderful story you guys may or may not know, but once he became a star, all the movies he worked on, he made the staffer, if you've ever worked at a big movie, there's tons of people that do all different things, hire as many homeless people to do jobs as he could.
Wow.
That was something Robin Williams, it was non-negotiable. He would not appear on set if they didn't hire some, and he wouldn't use this word, but I'm sure other people would be, is that people who are marginalized parts of society who couldn't get a job, whether it was because they had a felony or something and were struggling with homelessness, joblessness. It was just a big thing. And he was like, look, there's 100 jobs on the movie set. Just give a couple to people who, need a hand up. But if you're listening out there and you're struggling, or a person is struggling, the most important hand up sometimes is the own hand to yourself, and knowing that you do have that power. And I think that, I hear a lot of different things you're saying, but one of the things that really struck me is this idea or thought process of, you may feel alone. You may feel like there is no answer, and you may have sought it in therapy or in different ways, but you are part of the answer. You are important. You are loved. You have to find a way to love yourself. And I just, it's such a beautiful message. And yes, and we are not done. We will be having you.
No.
We will be having you back on. I cannot wait. I love this thought and idea of stewardship and understanding. And you said the book is coming out on May 1st?
Yeah, the pre-order link is already up, and you can get that on my website, which is just my first name, 2 L's, Ganel-Lyn, and you can go on to the store product page and see where you can pre-order. It's on sale for pre-order for $7.19, so it's not going to break your bank. I may be able to get a copy to you both. If you
We'll pay. We're happy to pay.
Okay, well, I really love the idea because it's something I get to practice, and sometimes I want to arrive somewhere and be a master at it, but there's nothing I'm really a master at. I'm a work in progress, practicing, and
vacuuming. You are a master at vacuuming.
Yeah, I don't want to brag, but I am. It's like, if it was an Olympic sport, I would have medaled a few times. I'm just going to tell you, I'm pretty good at it. So
I think the Russian judge likes bees. I'm just kidding.
Well, given the headlines recently, maybe that's not.
Oh no, they're not going to be allowed to judge anymore. It's fine.
And we're probably, I'm gonna, I don't shy away from the controversy, as you don't either, Mark. But there is there is a very similar sport in the Olympics where they use like a Swiffer, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Curling.
But at least
Curling
that thing has a score. At least there's a score in that one.
Yeah, so there's got to be some way that you can like.
You're right. Maybe I missed my calling. I should have been training as a curler this whole.
I'm sure there's a curling rink near you. Gotta be.
Well, we have the Olympics here, so we have a lot of Olympic venues.
That's right.
in
Just
Utah.
go up to Park City, and
Yeah,
I'm sure you'll find the curling venue.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a curling. I'm sure there's a curling venue even closer to you than Park City would be.
yeah, probably.
Ganel-Lyn, thank you so much. It has been
Thank
wonderful
you.
to get to know you. I look forward to it further. And obviously, it seems like your website is kind of the best entry. Are there any other contact or things you'd like to share?
I mean, it has all the links to all the other places. So if you have a favorite place you like to connect with people, I feel like social media is a double-edged sword, and it can be a place that's not great for mental health. And it's a place where at times we go into some big comparisons. But I really try to use it as a place where I share messages of hope and faith in a way that's authentic. And that means there's days you're going to find me on some of those platforms and I'm sharing with you that I'm not in a good space. And I've been known to do that. And some of the people that, I don't like the word followers, but followers get all alarmed, like what's wrong with me. And I always like to remind them, like, I show up in this space authentically, and that means I am having a real human experience. And as much as I share uplifting messages, I also feel like it's my responsibility in this space as a content creator to let the curtain get pulled back and show that there's days it's not working and I'm trying and I don't have answers and I'm just going to do the stay in your body for the day. So yeah, if you go to my website, Ganel-Lyn, Ganellyn, we didn't even talk about my weird name and the beautiful character building experience it was to grow up with that name, but maybe we'll bring that up on the next conversation we have. But if people go there, it has all the links. So YouTube, LinkedIn, a lot of Instagram interaction, and Facebook and Twitter. I don't love Twitter. I share over on Twitter, but they tend to be a little angry over there, and I don't need any more anger. So you can, I double share over there, so there's content, but yes. I hurry, get right off of it because it's a little too edgy at times for me, and my own mental health sometimes can't handle it. But yeah.
And I love that you live your life in accordance with my tagline, which is, it's perfectly okay to not always be okay.
Amen, brother. Amen. Like,
yeah.
I just think that's exactly full circle to what we started this conversation with, is that to normalize mental health means to normalize the fact that we're having mental health issues on a daily. And just because I have some tools, I don't have all the tools. And just because I have some answers, I don't have all the answers. And just because I figure out some things, man, life throws stuff at you, and I've been learning I really try to message from my scars and not my current bleeding wounds, but I've got some current bleeding wounds right now that, I'll come back and talk about them when they're starting to scar over a little. And so, that's the reality of humanness, and it's beautiful and it's messy, and it's important that we help each other where we can, but it starts here, like it's my job to take care of this person first, and then go out in my sphere of influence. So
I can't add anything to that, Eric.
I can't add anything to that, and I'm already looking forward to our next episode together.
Great.
This one hasn't even come out yet. And the Colorado-Utah border is we
need to meet over there in Grand Junction or something.
It's very porous. So we have to get together.
Yeah.
Well, if snow basin gets late season snow, I'll be dragging my ass on.
Well, listen, for sure. I mean, I hope you both still love me when I tell you that we're not big skiers, but we host them and we cheer you all on. That's
No, it's okay. I understand it. We both learned as adults, so we're strange.
I did tell my husband the other day that we're about to be empty nesters, that we probably, because we're not planning on leaving Utah, that we probably need to find some love affair with a winter sport if we're going to survive. And we've only lived here 23 years, so it's probably time that we
curling or skiing.
There is cross country skiing.
I have two groups that of women that go snowshoeing all through the winter, and they swear by it that it saves them.
Yep.
But that means I'm going to have to invest some money in some warmer outfits and some boots. So
You need the boots for sure, but if you're going snowshoeing or cross country skiing, you'll be surprised by how little extra clothing you need. You'll be sweating.
Okay. I'm going to gear myself up for it. I'm going to gear myself up for it.
And if this other thing gets rescheduled and happens in Oahu, I am happy to hop on a plane and come down.
Okay. And I may be in next week, and so I may be messaging you, Eric, if I can't find housing. So
yep.
Yeah. A little sand and sun therapy doesn't hurt anyone to get through March, you know?
Not at all. Not at all. We're getting the sun therapy right now, though. But with that, Eric DeRosa, thank you so much. This is From Survivor to Thriver, episode 55. We thank our guest, Ganel-Lyn Condie, so much for sharing so many things involving all different subjects. And it's been a beautiful conversation, and I cannot thank you guys both enough. It has certainly lit a fire under my brain a little bit, and I hope it has done that for our listeners and watchers as well. And with that, I'll leave you with these words, as I always do. Let's please all be as well as we can.